Hello everyone and welcome to Medicated Housewife DIY, where crafting and mental health come together. My name is Sarah. In today's DIY video, we are making 3 DIY aged vessels using a Dollar Tree vase, a stove cover, and a bowl, plus an old bottle that I already had on hand. This is a fun, easy, and quick DIY that gives you a high-end designer look on a budget. You're going to love all 3 of these Faux Pottery Effect antique looking DIY aged vessels. So stick around and let's go make some stuff and jump right into this. To begin with, I'm using one of the small containers of Spackle that you get in the hardware section of Dollar Tree. I removed it from the container. I put it in a large plastic cup and I'm mixing it with 3 paint colors. I am using the Craft Smart acrylic paint in the colors matte white, golden brown, and brown. Now, you can use any brand of acrylic paint for this, but I will link those that I used for you in the description box below. You want to add enough paint to thin the spackle out to a pancake batter consistency. So you're going to want to mix it really well until the mixture is smooth enough for you to paint with. I had this glass vase that I originally got from Dollar Tree, and I had already spray painted it white with Rust-Oleum paint and primer for a different project. So I took the now white vase and I'm going to paint it with my beigey brown spackle paint that I just mixed together. I cover the whole vase, however you want to say it, and a little on the inside lip on the top. I'm going to use a soft brush for this because I didn't actually mind some of the brush strokes that were sneaking in, since the whole point of painting this with spackle is to get a nice uneven texture. So the brush strokes really don't bother me. I gave it some time to dry and then I painted a second coat. Now, don't pay attention to the round tray in front of you. I did the video a little out of order, so please ignore it for now, but I had half a container of spackle that I decided to mix with another darker brownish paint color. I ended up using the FolkArt raw Sienna to mix this with, and I just have to say that this raw Sienna color, I always grab it, and then as soon as I use it, I hate the color. It just looks so unappealing when it's wet, but I committed to mixing it into the spackle, so I was going to use it. I don't want to say what it looks like when it's applied. Use your imagination. But I will say that it dries to a much different terracotta looking color, which is closer to what I had wanted, since I felt my beige was just maybe a little too light. I then did a full coat of the raw Sienna spackle onto my dry vase and then set that aside to fully dry. So once my vase is dry, see, I told you it dries to a much nicer terracotta looking shade. So once it's fully dry, I used a piece of fine grit sandpaper and did a light sanding over any of the really unattractive lumps or bumps that I saw and I didn't like. I didn't want to sand it too much because texture is really the look that we're going for with this. So you don't really want to sand it smooth. Next, I made a mixture of FolkArt acrylic paint in the color Camel and some matte white. I'll link them below. I mixed them with some water, and this time I'm using a rough brush and I'm wetting the brush and dabbing the watered down color all around my vase to lighten up the dark color that I just applied. I'm not trying to get full coverage. I want everything to be a little messy and uneven and muted in some areas. So if I apply too much color, I use a brush to sweep through it, or I'll add some water to mute it and then just blend and blend. This is really the fun part, at least for me. I love just adding paint and other colors and tones until you achieve the look that you want. This is where you can really have fun with it. Once my lighter camel color dries, I wanted to add some dark brown, so I used my Waverly Antique Wax mixed with some water and another rough brush. The similar technique, dabbing it on and wiping or blending or adding water to mute the color. This is the kind of DIY where instead of less is more, it's really more is more. Because when it doesn't look right to you, the answer is always to do more to it. These are the most therapeutic crafting projects, the ones where you really show your own artistic sense. It's like crafting therapy, at least for me, it is. How about you? Let me know in the comments if there are certain kinds of projects that really feel therapeutic to you, and what are they? I would love to know. Once the dark brown dries, I switch gears a little and I want to add some cooler, just less warm orangey color to the vase. So I used some Craft Smart acrylic paint in the color dark gray. And I think there was a touch of Deco Art light gray all mixed with water, and I very sparingly dabbed and brushed some gray onto the vase just to make it a little less warm colored and kind of make it a bit more neutral toned, if that makes sense. Next, I go in with a little bit of matte black paint, again, mixed with water. I just want to bring in more depth to the vase and help make the aging look authentic. By making these deep black little grooves and some scratches, that just helps to make it look realistically old. Then, of course, we're going in with some lighter camel and white mixed watered down paint just to lighten up the dark we just painted on. I told you, more is more when it comes to this type of DIY. When in doubt, just add more. Go crazy. I mean, it's never too much. And then we're going dark again with a little bit of Waverly Antique Wax mixed with water. And at this point, I'm using a toothbrush dipped in my camel and white watered down paint mixture. And I dip the toothbrush, dab it on a paper towel, and I use my finger to splatter paint some dots of that camel paint all around the vase, just to add to its vintagey kind of look. And lastly, we do the same splatter paint technique, this time using black paint mixed with water, and I scatter some tiny black dots all around our vase. And this is how my DIY number 1 aged vessel vase turned out. I am so genuinely happy with the texture and the color that this vase has. I really think it looks like some kind of ancient artifact that was dug up out of the ground or something. The colors look like rusted old rock or something like that. I'm seriously impressed with all the colors and the textures. I think that this would be an incredible addition to anyone's decor and definitely bring it up a couple of notches. It's super high end, and really, let's remember, this is nothing more than a Dollar Tree glass vase for $1 or $1.25 now, but still really impressive. But I want to know what you think. Let me know in the comments what you think of this vase. Does it look authentically antique and aged to you? Would you believe it was a real vintage vase? For DIY number 2, I'm starting with this metal stove burner cover from Dollar Tree. They come in a set of 2, we're only using 1, and I'm also using this wavy little plastic bowl that comes in a set of 2, I think, from the party section of Dollar Tree. I'm using hot glue to attach the bottom of the bowl to the bottom of the burner cover, and then I'm taking the whole thing outside to spray paint it white with Rust-Oleum paint and primer. Once the white paint is dry, I give the whole tray a coat of my Spackle mixed with paint from the previous DIY. It's Dollar Tree Spackle mixed with Craft Smart acrylic paint in the colors white, golden brown, and brown, mixed until the consistency of pancake batter. I believe I only did 1 coat of this beigey spackle paint, and then I waited for it to dry. Once the spackle paint dried, I had some unused spackle, so I used some of that to try and cover up the space where the burner cover was glued to the bowl, to try and make it look like it was just one continuous piece. I also used the spackle to try and build up the lip of the burner cover, which is going to be the top of our tray. And I wanted to make that lip around the edge look a little bit more substantial. So I used the spackle kind of like a little bit like clay to try and build that up. And then I set that aside to dry. Once the spackle dried, I used my fingers to rub off some of those loose pieces of spackle and any dangling pieces and remove any of the sharp bits. Then I repainted the entire thing with the beigey spackle paint, and then I let that fully dry. And at this point, I used the leftover spackle and mixed it with some of that FolkArt raw sienna paint, which turned this super unattractive color, as I discussed with you before, so I will not repeat it. But I painted the entire tray with this dark raw sienna spackle paint, and then I allowed that to fully dry. Once dry, it's a much better terracotta-ish color, and I did a light sanding with some fine grit sandpaper just over those larger bumps and bulges, and then I wiped the dust off of it. I used the same watered down painting technique as I did in DIY number 1, and that's starting with the FolkArt Camel color mixed with some white and then some water and a couple of rough brushes. We're just dabbing some color on the tray and then using another brush to blend it and to wipe it. And we also wet the brush to dilute the color that's on the tray, and that'll give it an overall more of like a muted kind of a color. Next, I used the Waverly Antique Wax as my darker brown shade to paint over that lighter camel color that we just used. So it's the same technique, but I did try and use a sponge to apply the color to the tray, and I quickly gave that up. I decided that brushes worked much better, so keep that in mind. You just seem to have more control with the brushes. So I dab on the color, and then I wipe, and then I blend and rub the brush over it. And I just use some water whenever I think the color is too dark or too intense. Next, I'm introducing some cooler tones as opposed to all the warm reddish and orange tones we've been using so far. I mixed some Craft Smart acrylic paint in dark gray and some Deco Americana in light gray, along with a drop or two of black, all mixed in with some water, and sparingly I dabbed that around parts of the tray, wiping off excess with another brush, or even using a paper towel in some cases to wipe off some of that excess color or some excess water. Next, I used some black chalkboard paint that I picked up at Dollar Tree, and I mixed it with water. I used this to bring in some depth to the tray and to give it some darker looking imperfections and faux pitting. I also ended up using some Waverly Antique Wax to darken that up too. And we're back to lightening it up again using that Camel white and the water paint mixture. The same rough brushing technique as before. And some watered down antique wax to darken the light that we just applied. Then I used a toothbrush dipped in watered down camel and white paint and splattered the little dots of paint all over the front of the tray and the back and underneath. Then I did the same exact toothbrush splatter technique using watered down black paint on all the sides of the tray. And this is how DIY number 2, my aged vessel tray, turned out. Now, it goes without saying that I love the texture and color, but I think the modernist shape of this tray makes it much more interesting. I only have it elevated here so you can see it better, but I think a tray like this would look really interesting on a coffee table or console table in a living room. It still has that antique, vintage, faux aged, trendy kind of look. It's just not the shape you'd expect with this kind of finish. I still think it's high-end looking, and I would definitely use this in my home. But what about you? What do you think of this aged vessel tray? Let me know in the comments. DIY number 3 begins with this empty bottle I had in my home, and knowing me, I'm going to guess it was an empty tequila bottle, just a guess. I cleaned it and I took it outside to spray paint it white with my Rust-Oleum Prime and Paint. I painted the bottle with 2 coats of the Spackle paint mixture using the Craft Smart colors white, golden brown, and brown, and I waited for both of those coats to dry. Next, I painted 1 coat of the second Spackle paint mixture using the FolkArt Raw Sienna paint color. Once that dried, I gave it a quick sanding with some fine grit sandpaper. Next, I rough painted over the raw sienna color with a mixture of Camel, white, and water, same technique as the other 2 DIYs. Then a rough coat of Waverly Antique wax mixed with water. Then a light coat of dark gray mixed with water. Then a little bit of black chalkboard paint mixed with water for some added depth. And then back to lightening it up with the Camel and white paint with water mixture. And then even more lightening up, followed by some Waverly Antique wax. Next, I used a toothbrush and the Camel white and water paint mixture to splatter paint all over the bottle. And lastly, I did the toothbrush splatter paint technique using black paint mixed with water, same as I did with the lighter color. And this is how DIY number 3, my aged vessel bottle, turned out. Again, thrilled with the color and texture. I think this truly looks like an antique bottle, like it was buried in the ground for hundreds of years or something like that. I think it's pretty cool looking, and I would definitely use this as high-end on a budget decor in my home. Plus, this one was super easy and cost nothing since I already had the bottle. How great is that? And these are how all 3 of my aged vessel DIYs turned out. I like these 3 even better as a set. I think they work so well together and complement each other nicely. And as I said before, I was so thrilled with the color and textures I was able to achieve on these. And I'm definitely going to use those techniques on other projects because I just think they're so high-end and trendy looking. But what do you think? Which one of these aged vessels is your favorite, and what would you do with it? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you enjoyed this Medicated Housewife DIY, and if you did, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing. It really helps out my channel. Once again, thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm the Medicated Housewife, and crafting is my medication.